It's funny that some independent media are still in denial about the existence and the true nature of concentration camps in America, commonly known as Fema camps. The evidence is overwhelming, and from certain documents, I can assert how detainees will be captured and transported to these infamous Fema camps. The purpose of this video is to demonstrate that from the government-owned documents, they tell us what kind of hell of earth is waiting the American people courtesy of the United Nations.
It's hard to miss. 60,000 pounds and 13 feet tall. The bulletproof armored vehicle is a hand-me-down from the military. It's part of a program where surplus military equipment is given to local law enforcement agencies.
It's simply a way to move our officers around in a protected environment.
It was established that the globalists have organized a plot designed to overthrow the U.S. government and the American people. Their first objective is to bring holy hell to the United States. Along with the CIA support, deep state resources, and the true use of the FBI cover-up elements are in the midst of bringing so much chaos to American soil.
I came out to expose this because I saw specifically, in my case, the CIA engage in unconstitutional and illegal activity outside of the Constitution, which for me is everything now. The President of the United States has his own secret army, special operators that he sends on presidential order into foreign countries in secret to engage in killings, overturning governments, and things that the American people don't know about. It's a secret force.
The UN interventions will be deemed necessary based on previously covered prior agreements between the U.S. government and the United Nations. A while ago, I cited a Fox News report which stated that the UN soldiers, Russians, and the Chinese will seizing guns and imprisoning those deemed to be a threat to the New World Order. It's been long documented how the UN troops have been participating for the takeover. It will be UN forces that will be operating the Fema camps of mass incarceration. So the first thing you need to do is ask yourself this question. Will America's soldiers fire upon American citizens upon a martial law roundup of millions of Americans?
6, red man, engage hostile targets as they appear. Deadly force is authorized. How copy? Over? Redman, traffic actual, negative. Be advised, I have women and children in my line of fire. I got snipers in the buildings at 400 meters. How copy? Over? What is it about this order you don't understand, Captain Lee? Sir, are you ordering me to fire into the crowd? Over? Yes, goddammit! Waste the motherfuckers! 6 out!
Unfortunately, the answer to that question is a moot point. It's clear from analyzing data from the Army concentration camp materials that the American soldiers will be used to round up detainees. However, the camps in which people will be deported will ultimately be staffed and run by foreign troops, and these troops will be under UN control. It was the same case with the Nazis. Slave labor will be a part of the landscape as evidenced by following Army documents. Appendix J. Commanders must organize and manage detainees in such a manner as to permit the proper and ready employment of each detainee. Establish and maintain a current occupational skill record for each detainee, includes new skills as they are acquired. Assigning individual detainees to work detail or job on a regular or permanent basis. Establishing vocational training projects and encouraging detainees to study, develop new skills to maximize extent possible. I'm not calling anyone ignorant or uninformed, but this information comes directly from the Army files that were leaked with their original administrative numbers. So don't be in the comment section talking about, oh, you're making this up. Why are you putting this information out there? No, it's not that. These documents come directly from the Army files that will leak, and you need to wake the fuck up. But anyway, from the perspective of history, concentration camps are notoriously known for being institutions of murder, just straight murder. Based on this notation, I went through so many documents. I'll have the PDF file linked in below, and found only scant reference to the subject of deaths in the concentration camps. Now wait a minute. This document painstakingly describes interrogation processes, food preparation, transportation, and detainees. But they're barely mentioning how they are going to deal with these dead bodies.
I wouldn't go to a FEMA camp or get onto a FEMA barge, because when you do, you can disappear, especially from a natural disaster or so-called natural disaster like a hurricane, for example.
Think about it for a second, guys. In a facility filled with divergent population with regard to age, health status, and physical conditioning, should the authorities be concerned with what happens with an inmate dies for an expected heart attack or maybe a damn stroke? What would they do with these dead bodies? I mean, that is one of my main concerns that I'm worried about. What are they going to do with these dead bodies? So I just sat back and kind of asked myself, if proper preparations are not taken for the proper care and disposal of dead bodies, wouldn't that imperil the health of the fellow inmates, but not to mention the guards and other military personnel? This should be a primary concern for any facility. However, this is one of the areas where the FEMA camp army manual relatively silent. Now why is that? Why are they so silent?
Everything is set into place. They've begun throwing the poor, the homeless, into the prison camps, the FEMA camps. Now all they have left to do is take the guns.
Armed black. I told you they were coming. There's no lights on them.
Military helicopters conduct covert exercises over U.S. bank buildings.
The entire city of Boston is in lockdown. In the suburb of Watertown, police with guns drawn are searching door to door.
I mean, we had martial law up there. FBI and all these agents coming in and closing things down, going into people's houses.
Those that didn't fit in Hitler's Germany had reason to fear. The Nazis allowed no opposition.
Day, their advantage lies in the speed of their strike. At night, they seem to appear from the darkness. Marines and sailors of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit's Maritime Raid Force conduct a series of urban assaults as part of a realistic urban training exercise created by Special Operations Training Group. The exercise uses aggressors, improvised explosive devices, and high-value targets in a simulated community.
And they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days shall they be visited.
The Department of Defense has just issued a new list of extremists that should be watched. And on that, in fact, number one, past the Muslim Brotherhood, and past Hamas, Hezbollah. Number one, evangelical Christians.
We begin tonight with a newly leaked U.S. Army military police training manual for what they are calling civil disturbance operations. The Army manual outlines the plan to kill rioters and demonstrators in America. That's right, they have plans to confiscate our firearms and kill American citizens on U.S. soil. This during a mass civil unrest. I guess shooting innocent civilians, perhaps. Our own military being trained for armed conflict with U.S. citizens. They're being trained to confiscate our guns and preparations to process us into camps during civil unrest.
Oh yeah, of course. They don't want to get exposed. Aha, I get it. Now, when you go into 569 document, when a detainee in the U.S. custody dies, the attending medical officer will immediately furnish the detention facility commander or hospital commander or commander of the unit that exercised custody of the detainee if the death did not occur in the facility. What? I mean, this is ludicrous. This is straight crazy. Then on the document, it goes on to say this initial assessment as to whether the detainee's death was or was not the result of the deceased's own misconduct. Wow. What an interesting about 569 is the cause of the death is not categorized in any meaningful manner, except to say that there is a conscious effort to determine if the death of the inmate was due to their own fucking actions.
Our government made a series of hasty decisions. Poorly planned, haphazard approach. Too often, we set those principles aside as luxuries that we could no longer afford. Our government made decisions based on fear rather than foresight. The decisions that were made over the last 8 years established an ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable.
An ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism that was neither effective nor sustainable. Ouch. Then, moments later, he announced his own ad hoc legal approach for fighting terrorism. President Obama today proposed something new, something called prolonged detention. Doesn't sound that bad, right? Prolonged detention. Did you ever see the movie Minority Report? It was based on a Philip K. Dick short story. Came out in 2002. It starred Tom Cruise, remember? He played a police officer in something called the Department of Pre-Crime. Pre-crime is where people are arrested and incarcerated to prevent crimes that they have not yet committed.
Mr. Marks, by mandate of the District of Columbia Pre-Crime Division, I'm placing you under arrest for the future murder of Sarah Marks and Donald Dubin that was to take place today, April 22nd, at 0800 hours, 4 minutes.
No,
I didn't do anything. Sarah! Give the man his hat.
You didn't do anything, but you're gonna. Future murder. Creepy, right? Putting somebody in jail not for what they've done, but for what you're very sure they're going to do?
There may be a number of people who cannot be prosecuted for past crimes. In some cases because evidence may be tainted, but who nonetheless pose a threat to the security of the United States.
We're not prosecuting them for past crimes, but we need to keep them in prison because of our expectation of their future crimes.
Al-Qaeda terrorists and their affiliates are at war with the United States, and those that we capture, like other prisoners of war, must be prevented from attacking us again.
Prevented. We will incarcerate people preventively. Preventive incarceration. Indefinite detention without trial. That's what this is. That's what President Obama proposed today, if you strip away the euphemisms. One civil liberties advocate told the New York Times today, quote, "We've known this was on the horizon for many years, but we were able to hold it off with George Bush. The idea that we might find ourselves fighting with the Obama administration over these powers is really stunning."
Now, when you look at 573, the NRDC will notify the ICRC of all detainees' deaths. The NDRC will maintain detainees' DD Forms 2064 for the period of hostilities or occupation for the duration of any other military operation, or as otherwise directed. When authorized, the NDRC will archive detainees' DD Forms 2064. Okay, wait, hold on. Let me get this shit straight. In other words, there will be no numbered trials for genocide because the records will not be permanently maintained? Only fucking conclusion that I could come up with is most of the death associated with the detainees will not occur at the facility itself. And this explains why the Army is seemingly unconcerned with this issue. This opens a whole nother can of whoop ass and a whole host of possibilities. Are the unhealthy going to be transported to a facility where humanely be treated like shit while their medical conditions will be treated? I don't know. I think it's fairly easy to see where I am going with this. Can we really expect the authorities who have committed an inhumane act by incarcerating people for no legitimate reason to suddenly discover their conscience and treat the informed with compassion and dignity? For several years, I've talked to numerous people about the presence of foreign troops training on American soil. There's been so much evidence of Fema bilateral agreement with the Russians to bring in 15,000 soldiers for disaster training. And despite all the evidence, and you still have the sheeple refusing to look right what's in front of them. They bury their head up their asses and will never know what hit them when all hell breaks the fuck loose. That's all I'm saying.
Now to a controversial bill resurfacing in Congress. The Fema camp bill allows the government to run at least 6 military installations when a national emergency is declared. These emergency centers would be run by Fema under the command of the Secretary of Homeland Security. A few years ago, a similar bill was presented in Congress, but it didn't go anywhere over concerns that the broad language can lead to sweeping, unchecked government power. Now, another version is back up for debate, and Bob English, a civil liberties activist and blogger, joins us now for more. Welcome there, Mr. English.
Hello.
So it didn't pass the first time around. Why was there resistance to it?
Well, a fellow by the name of Lee Rogers began writing about it and raising some alarms, concern over the broad sweeping powers it would give the Department of Homeland Security, and it kind of caught fire and just died.
It just died because people were afraid of what this could lead to.
Exactly. There were concerns that there were parallels to the Japanese internment facilities in World War II that we saw, and for practical purposes, the financial mess was going on, and there were other things to be dealt with at the time.
Okay, so there were concerns over the vague language. It didn't pass. Now there's this new version of the bill. What's changed?
Well, they took out the vague language so that the centers are specifically set up to house, shelter, even educate people for extended periods of time, but they are limited to that specific purpose.
Okay, so of course this legislation is meant to be enacted in the event of an emergency. But what exactly does that mean? What is the definition of emergency, especially when it comes to this legislation? When would it be enacted?
Sure, we have to go back to 1988 to the Stafford Act bill to actually get the definition of emergency, and this covers things like tornadoes, floods, hurricanes, natural disasters, but it also gives the president to declare an emergency to avert a catastrophe, which raises the issue of preemptiveness.
Okay, but this also, this is the goal here is to mobilize resources to have this plan to prevent a tragedy from happening, but also a reaction to it, right?
Yes, a reaction, and that's where some of the concerns for civil liberties activists comes in, because it's a slippery slope. Once the government has this power and all these centers are set up, and it's at least 6, maybe more, probably more.
There is a real potential for the abuse of power here.
Okay, interesting. You know, we have this map that shows how the U.S. would be divided in the event of an emergency, if we can pull that out there. There it is. So this is how the U.S. will be divided into districts. You see 10 of them there. This is according to the National Emergency Center establishment. Can you describe what this map is? What exactly does that mean? I mean, it doesn't really make sense in terms of states as we know them. What is this classification system? What are the purposes?
It doesn't look like the map that you and I saw in elementary school.
Not at all.
Effectively, the U.S. has been cordoned off into these different districts. And so these new emergency centers will be spread out throughout the United States in most of these eventually.
And it gives FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security jurisdiction over what goes on in these places during a time of emergency.
Okay, I want to go into because this act does make some specific examples, some exclusions, set some limitations, I should say. So the National Emergency Center Establishment Act, what it does not do, it does not authorize any federal officer or employee to force an individual to enter a national emergency center or prevent an individual from leaving a national emergency center. So, Bob, it looks to me like there are some safeguards there. If you don't like it, you can leave.
Well, I'd like to think so. And this was actually one of the other things that was changed in this new version of the bill. They added this. But if you read what they're saying, you know, federal officer, federal employee, that doesn't cover members of the military. And since these are going to be installed in decommissioned and existing military bases, you're going to have people from the military there. So that doesn't cover members of the military. And since these are going to be installed in decommissioned and existing military bases, you're going to have people from the military there. So
I would think they will have people, namely the military, who would be able to force people to stay there or prevent them from leaving.
Now, for civil liberty advocates like yourself and others like you that are worried that this could be a precursor to government overreach, what would satisfy what would make you more comfortable with this piece of legislation, I guess? Do you think that the language in it should be clarified, that it's not so vague so that it could be interpreted and abused?
Ideally, it would be withdrawn, but if I were forced to live with it, I would want the restrictions on keeping people in there to extend to the military and, in fact, to anybody, not let the states or even local governments have that ability.
Okay, Bob, so we're talking about emergencies, we're talking about disasters, we're talking about chaotic situations where some order hopefully the goal there is to be established. And, you know, some are going to say desperate times call for desperate measures. So doesn't that ring true for natural disasters and cases like that?
What do desperate people in the government do in those situations?
Like I said, I think it's a slippery slope, and we don't really need people in power with these vast sweeping powers to begin with.
My final thoughts. The plan associated with the activation of FEMA camps has been already set into motion. I hope y'all already know that. This Confederate will raise fucking hell. The UN will generously offer to intervene based on new agreements. These false flag terror attacks is designed to create the chaos necessary to bring in the UN has already begun. I apologize for confusing y'all, but hey, y'all need to wake the fuck up. Please allow me to ask these damn questions. And not only me ask the questions, you ask the questions. Why would FM 39 forever be written if it were not going to be operationalized at some future date? If the attention and the possibility did not exist, then why waste your fucking time on these elaborate plans. All I have to say is, what's coming is no longer coming. This shit is already here.